home. We are WNST, AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore. And of course, Baltimore Positive here all week long, recapping our Maryland Crab Cake Tour presented by the Maryland Lottery in conjunction with our friends at Window Nation. I even get a chance to wear the fun hat. And our newest sponsor, Jiffy Lube, will be telling you about the multi-care and all that's going on there above and beyond just oil changes. But great conversation with Mike Rosigliano and my old friend Max Weiss, who and I, we went back and forth about the Orioles and even a little Colts and Ravens history in there as we did the show at Lauraville from Coco's Pub, had delicious coconut shrimp. That's with a K. Rasig is my co-host with a K, K-O, co-host, as the coconut shrimp with a K like Coco's. I have to get used to all of this stuff. They're our newest sponsor. Had a great day. And then, of course, the Ultra Nate, who I've known for 20 years. I've never had on the show. We talked house music. Roz from the Lottery came over. Always good to see Roz Lane because she gives us these Raven scratches. We had a bunch of winners at Coco's the other day, too. We had some winners over the weekend. The Orioles won some games after sort of stumbling against the former tribe, I should say, the Guardians on Thursday and Friday, keeping us up late at night. But it was the Ravens on Sunday afternoon in the rain. Luke Jones now joins us to discuss the aftermath of a strange game in a lot of ways. Look, anytime the Colts come back to Baltimore, it's a strange day for me, Luke. It was the 50th anniversary on Saturday of my first ever Colts game that my dad took me to see Joe Namath get sacked by Stan White. John Riggins ran the ball that day, and the Baltimore Colts threw 8 interceptions that day, 4 from Marty Domers, 4 from Burt Jones. And 50 years and a day later, it was a series of gaffes that cost the Baltimore Ravens a game against the Indianapolis Colts. And the decisions of John Harbaugh, and look, you can read my letter to John Harbaugh. That's about his integrity and about truth and about who lies and who's stopping press conferences and all of that. But this is football, and this is 2 minutes and 3 seconds left to go. Steichen sort of out Harbaugh a little bit, Luke.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, to make it very simplistic, I mean, they won the game, right? I mean, ultimately it's about winning and losing. And if you come out on the losing side, the mistakes you make are magnified. The decisions you make are magnified. If you win, as we said in a previous segment, if Matt Gay misses one of those 53-yard field goals, I guess not the one in overtime, because if he missed that one, the game probably ends in a tie. But if he misses one of the other ones, we're having a different conversation. We're saying that it wasn't a pretty win, but a win is a win, right? When you lose, everything's magnified. And certainly when you look at just the way the Ravens played in general, I mentioned how it felt early on like this game might end up being a blowout. Like this game might be, even if not a blowout, more like the Houston Texans win in week 1, where, they didn't run away with it, but the outcome never felt in doubt. I think we'd all agree with that at the very least. And, they turned the ball over. The offensive identity, they were chasing it the rest of the way. It was at best choppy at times, and at worst it was lousy. I mean, that was lousy in overtime. They didn't even gain a first down. But to bring it back to John Harbaugh, as you mentioned, I think you can always pick apart decisions here or there, but when you look at what happened as Gardner Minshew steps out of the back of the end zone, and it was a strange couple moments where he steps out, there's a sack, as the whistle, the referee's trying to blow the whistle, he's sacked in the end zone, but he stepped on the end line, and that's a safety right there. The clock stops right there. They did go back and review it and look at it to see where the clock should be. And according to John Harbaugh's explanation, by the time they realized that there was 1:58 on the clock, or let me rephrase that. By the time they realized it wasn't 1:58 and it was actually 2:03, because as it ended in real time, it looked like 1:58, and then they review it and they put time back on the clock. By the time they realized that, as John Harbaugh explained it, they were unable to get it communicated to Zay Flowers. Now, I don't understand how no one on the coaching staff, no players, even veteran players, no one realizes that in time to alert Zay Flowers. And look, he's a rookie returning a kick. He's not their primary kick returner. He was their returner on a free kick post safety kind of situation. So I don't put that on him nearly as much. Someone has to alert him. And What do you do if you can't get the message to him? Call a timeout. They had timeout. They had 3 timeouts at the time.
Well,
So
this sort of harkens back to the Billy Cundiff thing from 10 years. It's like when you have timeouts, you keep them and they're there. And Harbaugh hasn't had problem challenging things and losing timeouts. But when you have timeouts, that should always be the first go-to for everybody on the field, for leaders on the field. Is we don't want to burn a timeout, but we don't want to get beaten either, right? Like ever.
sure, sure. So I mean, you look at that, and look, let's be clear. Even that happening, if your offense can get a first down, the game's over,
Well, I was
right?
going to say the minute that Minshew stepped on the line, and I'm watching it, and it was clear he stepped on the line. It's
Mm-hmm.
clear he went out right away,
Sure,
and I'm
sure.
like, game's over. I mean, game's over. The
Should
game's
have
over.
been.
The game's over. I mean, like at that point in the casino up at Hollywood, like I don't know what odds I could get that the call, like the game's over. Uh, That's that's on. I mean, when you think about it that way, it's really unacceptable. I mean, they lost the game a couple times, but that's the Colts gave you the game at that point. I mean, they're playing out of their end zone. The kid didn't field the punt. I mean, the Colts made a ton of bad decisions to lose the football game too.
Yeah, I mean, it's not as though they played a perfect game and the Ravens didn't, and that it was like that. I mean, both teams made mistakes. Neither team was perfect in how they played. The Ravens definitely are the more talented football team, but that was neutralized somewhat when you're talking about go look at the inactive list and the number of starters they were missing. So, we can go back and forth on that. I mean, Indianapolis didn't play a perfect game, but yeah, when you have the backup quarterback for the opposing team step in the back of the end zone, back on the end line, that should have been it. And even if it's not, the idea that you punt the ball back to them and they get the ball back 22 seconds later or whatever it was. I mean, that's unthinkable. How in the blue, what, does that happen? It's absolutely inexcusable. And let's be clear. I mean, they kicked the game tying field goal with what, just under a minute to go in regulation. It's not as though if they didn't make that mistake on the free kick that the game would have been over, but Indianapolis would have had very little time to operate with. And when you do that, and then, oh yeah, you also commit a penalty on third down, even though it looked like the officiating crew did miss a face mask, that would have been an offsetting penalty situation, and they would have replayed third down, and maybe the offense would have actually converted there. I'm not holding my breath based on the way they were playing at that point in the game, but I mean, it's unthinkable that you're getting the ball back on a free kick with 2:03 to go, knowing that your opponent has one timeout left, and you punt it back to them with 1:48 to go, and Gardner Minshew's going back on the field with what, 1:41 to go. I mean, how does that can't happen? That just can't happen from a coaching standpoint. Todd Monken's play calling there, execution, and I get it. Gus Edwards wasn't out there, and you're down to Melvin Gordon, who the Ravens thought so highly of that he didn't even make the 53-man roster. Let's keep in mind that you're talking about practice squad guys they were counting on in different spots. But I mean, that just can't happen. That's just sloppy. It's bad coaching, and it's bad execution. So it's really, really disappointing because and I don't give the defense a total pass. I mean, they could have made a final stop. Part of the issue here was no one made the big play at the end, whether we're talking about Lamar Jackson or someone on defense, force a turnover, get a strip sack, whatever it might be. But instead, they allowed Indy to tie it up and send it into overtime. So it was just a complete breakdown. And for that to happen, that sequence of events to happen after Gardner Minshew pulls a Dan Orlovsky and runs out of the back of the end zone, I mean, it really is unthinkable that the final 2 minutes played out the way they did. And again, I think it starts at the top with John Harbaugh and his staff failing in that situation. I mean, that was anyone, whether it's someone else on the kick return team saying, Zay, they put 2:03, they're 2:03 to go. You can't fair catch this, especially if you're going backwards. It's one thing if it was a kick where he had to run up and you're running into the coverage coming downfield and you call a fair catch in that situation, fine. But when they boot it and you're catching it as you're moving backwards, there's really no reason to fair catch that anyway in that situation. So I didn't really understand the thinking, even if it was 158. Don't you want to take a few more seconds off? Every few seconds you can bleed from the clock in that situation is a good thing. The clock running down is your friend. So I don't know why you would do something in that situation. Again, unless Zay Flowers is sprinting forward to catch the ball. I didn't really necessarily get that philosophy anyway, let alone talking about what happened where they put 2:03 back on the clock and the 2-minute warnings back in play. Just did not make sense to me. And John Harbaugh's explanation just did not jive with me.
Well, I mean, and this is where, look, I'm on the outside and I'm the wrong guy to talk to about whether they're honest or whether they're accountable or whether they're front facing or whether they're transparent, because they're not any of that. If they were any of that, I would have been in the press conference in my seat like I was the first 26 years of the franchise, right? So this is the point where, and I've written about this in my column this week, which was just the Orioles are going to play 5 games this week. And the Ravens are in a position to be able to hide here a little bit for a couple of weeks, in my opinion, from the fan base here, for people spending money on playoff tickets, for 50,000 people going down there on Saturday night again to be a part of this, and the fact that tickets were $10 on Sunday, nobody wanted to go to the game, nobody wanted to go. There were empty seats everywhere. Maybe they wanted to stay home. Maybe it's the weather. I mean, rain never used to bother Baltimore sports fans. I was one of them. I sat out there, ponchos, no problem. I just the whole mojo for the Ravens right now, they're going away for a month with this. They can go in high, but if they come back 2-5 or they come back 3-4, and they can't hide on Sunday and Monday, but the Orioles are really going to change the oxygen around here in a way that even if you scoff at me now, 3 weeks from now, if the Ravens lose the next 2 weeks, people will be mad and whatever, and they'll be 2-3 or whatever, and you'll say, well, they lost road games in the division, they're banged up. At this point, we got to talk about Edwards. We got to talk about Bateman. Add that in to your infirmary report this week for Coons Ford, and the WNST tech service is going to be alive as well. But there is a point where they just make this up as they go along. Harbaugh would do his little song and dance on Monday and reiterate why he wasn't lying to you on Sunday, and nobody knew the clock, and how could it be his fault? And they'll practice, but the Orioles are going to play games where the fans are going to be talking about that. Maybe not by the weekend, and maybe not even into next week, because the Orioles won't play for 5 days next week if they do things right. But you didn't buy it. You didn't buy what he was selling you in the postgame.
Well, look, I don't know this, and maybe getting a chance to dig around over the next few days, we'll get some semblance of what really happened. We also know there are times where, look, it's Zay Flowers as a rookie. Nestor, it's possible he messed up. and no, and look, I'm not suggesting he did, but it's possible that something like that happens, and a coach then will try to cover for a player publicly, or teammates will try to cover for a player publicly. I don't know that. Like I said, someone, anyone, coach, staffer, quality control guy, a veteran, another veteran on the kickoff team or the kick return team, someone has to alert him there. And like I said, part of the reason why this doesn't jive with me is I don't understand the rationale of why you're directing him to call a fair catch if he's moving backwards to to catch the ball anyway. Even if it's 158 to go, wouldn't you rather Zay Flowers jog around or run around for another 5, 6, 7 seconds? I'm not
to
saying
your point, he's not their first choice in there. They just want to make sure he catches the ball, because the thing that would get them beat is a muff punt, right? Like if he doesn't catch the ball, that gets them beat.
Well, he's their first choice because they were, they're in their kick return for a free kick, and that's what I assume. Devin Duvernay, it's not as though he was injured. So
by the way, it wasn't a foregone conclusion that they wouldn't onside that.
Sure, yeah. I mean, it's a free kick situation, so you never really know what's going to happen. But again, that's where I go back to. Even if putting the clock issue aside, I don't know why you're so adamant about wanting him to call a fair catch when he's running backwards 20 yards to catch it. I mean, again, if he's coming forward on a very short kick and you want to try to avoid the situation where he's running forward and someone, pops him and the ball pops out, then I get that. Call a fair catch in that situation. So it just, it was it wasn't the way it needed to be executed. Whether it was directly Harbaugh, whether it was Chris Horton, whether someone else on the staff who's in charge of monitoring replay and changes to the clock and all of those different things, whether it was any veteran players who saw it but didn't say anything, or even if Zay Flowers, like I said, even if he just messed up, that can't happen. I mean, that's the kind of thing that gets you beat. That's the kind of thing when that part administrative and then part not executing a play the way it needs to be executed. I mean, that was crucial. And I want to point out again, it's not like Indianapolis kicked the ball at the gun, at the buzzer to tie it and send it into overtime. So it's not as though they necessarily wouldn't have had enough time if that happened. But you could have made it way more difficult. You made it way easier for them by preserving and giving them an extra timeout. That much is the obvious. So it's poor execution. However you want to explain it. And again, it could have been as simple as, even if you couldn't alert it, call a timeout. You have 3 there. Preserving a timeout for yourself isn't nearly as important there as executing that play correctly when you're at the advantage, because you have a 3-point lead with 2:03 to go. So it's unacceptable, especially when you're talking about a veteran head coach and plenty of veteran coaches on his staff. I mean, that shouldn't happen. Someone had to recognize that more quickly than they did to prevent that from happening.
He's Luke Jones. He is Baltimore Luke. He will be in Owings Mills all week, bringing you Ravens coverage as the Ravens prepare to go to Cleveland, where the Orioles stumbled a little bit over the weekend and then figured it out by the end of the weekend. And we will be monitoring all things Orioles all week. Luke will be at the ballpark. The Nationals are in town. The Terps are playing great football and undefeated. I got Dave Preston coming on this week. Rick Dempsey. Yes, that Rick Dempsey used to have a restaurant. No, he was the MVP, the '83 World Series. He'll be on this week talking about some winter camping possibilities. I don't know if my back could handle time in the cage, or whether I could, get down and get hot grounders. But Rick Dempsey's doing a fantasy camp. Be talking about that as well this week. And certainly with the orange dust being everywhere, the Browns are this is an interesting week for the Ravens, an interesting couple of weeks as they do this 3-game road thing. And we'll talk a lot about this because the Orioles are going to own this place. Do you agree with that premise, or do you hotly dispute that the Ravens will be on the tip of people's tongues on Wednesday and Thursday and Friday when the Orioles are playing game 2 and 3 and 4?
Well, I don't think it goes away to the degree that you're saying, because it's the NFL. I mean, it's king. And regular season NFL games outdraw baseball postseason games. Now, that said, when the Orioles are actually playing, which, keep in mind, there are no playoff games this week, and if they take care of business with their magic number at coming home for the final homestand being at 3, they're not going to have any games until the following weekend. We're still a week plus, almost 2 weeks out from when they're going to start playing. So the Ravens aren't going away. There's no running and hiding. I get what you're saying in terms of going on the road, in terms of people coming, being in attendance and all that.
Well, Harbaugh can hide a little bit this week after the 2-minute warning gaffe, because there's going to be a party in town. I mean, literally, the city's going to catch fire this week. Like, they're going to win the division. They're going to have a bye. They're not going to play next week. And there's going to be a night at Camden Yards this week that's going to make the people forget about what happened on Sunday. I guess that's my point. That never used to be the case around here, when the sky would be falling on the franchise this week after this ish on Sunday against the Colts, no less, and then have to go on the road and play Cleveland, who looks good, Pittsburgh, who looked okay. And, I'm not saying they're going to be underdogs, but they're not going to be heavily favored after that effort on Sunday, and especially with the way the infirmary looks. It's not that the Ravens are playing bad football for me. It's that they might not be any good with 10 of their starters out. They might not be, and that would be for most franchises.
Well, I mean, I don't know if I'd say any good. I mean, they're 2-1 even with the injuries that they've had. But your point's well taken. I think there's plenty of oxygen for what the Orioles are going to do this week, and for the Ravens, quite frankly. I mean, I'm not saying you, because lots of people bring this up. I mean, I'd like to think we have a bigger attention span here in Baltimore than, we can only focus on the Orioles and then forget about the Ravens, or vice versa. Now, plenty of years we've forgotten about the Orioles because this time of year there was nothing, they were playing out the string, for much of the Ravens' existence. But I mean, it's this is a big week, and for the Ravens, they've got to get healthy. And what you just mentioned in terms of the number of starters, I mean it's going to apply to anyone, Nestor. I
Of
mean, it
course.
really is.
Yeah.
I mean, uh, I would say when you have your franchise quarterback out there, and this is where we kind of get into, and we'll talk more about Lamar Jackson, and there were plenty of good things that he did, including with his legs on Sunday. The rest of their running game didn't leave a whole lot to be desired. Gus Edwards had his moments and until he was concussed and left the game, but they didn't make enough plays in the passing game. And when you're talking about your franchise quarterback being one of the guys that is on the field, you'd like to think he can make that up. So they've got to get healthy. There's no doubt. Going to Cleveland this week, not going to be easy because, as you pointed out, Brown's off to a pretty good start. And more specifically, their defense is off to a really good start. So Ravens need to get as healthy as they can get and get themselves back on track. They very much need to have an effort more closely resembling what we saw in Cincinnati than what we saw against Indy on Sunday, because that will not cut it on the road. And the early lines that I saw, Nestor, actually has the Browns being a slight favorite in Cleveland, which speaks to how well they've started, but also speaks to the Ravens just, the injuries just piling up and not quitting at this point.
Yeah, my pick stunk on Sunday early in the day. So, I was 21 and 10 and 2. Christian Horton from Hollywood Casino is going to join me a little later on in the week. We'll make our picks before Thursday, get them out on the interweb. What a week we have around here. I've got letters to Steve Bisciotti and John Harbaugh up, a columnist on just the whole purple and orange smoke blowing around here this week that's very unusual, rarefied. I found my pictures as I'm rummaging through Curio Wellness, and our friends at Foreign Dot are sponsoring our 25th anniversary. I'm finding all of these old pictures and scanning them down. And, I found the pictures of me with Rick Krivda and Ray Miller and Elrod Hendricks and Mike Bordick and Eric Davis in the Orioles taped up clubhouse in 1997 after the celebration and beating the Seattle Mariners. I have pictures of me and Messina and Ken Griffey, and Ken Griffey came over to the Orioles locker room. So I have these pictures, and it's 1997. And what I really remember about that day was Cordell Stewart playing Memorial Stadium and doing both of the games. Cleveland had that on Sunday, right? Cleveland had the Browns playing a home game and the Orioles playing on Sunday. Now Cleveland this Sunday. The Ravens will be in there playing football this week. But we have that dual sport thing happening all week. Luke is I'm getting some toothpicks and some extra coffee from Rofo. Going to hook him up with some Jamaican Blue Mountain over there like Justin Tucker, so he can have a little extra kick this week for what we're going to need here for the celebration as the magic number whittles down and the Ravens go on the road to Cleveland and Pittsburgh and London. We're going to be up at Hollywood Casino in Perryville with my man Christian Horton on the 15th of October doing breakfast from Tottenham. We're looking forward to that. So get up there with us on October 15th. That'll be a Maryland Crab Cake Tour presented by the Maryland Lottery in conjunction with our friends at Window Nation, certified master installer. I am not. My shirt says so. Window siding doors. I got my windows done last year. 866-90 Nation, the way to do that with Window Nation. And our newest sponsor, Jiffy Lube and the multi-care. There's Jiffy Lube right around the corner. Mine is the Merritt Boulevard location because they treat me right over there, and it's my homeland in Dundalk. But you can find a Jiffy Lube around the corner from you as well. We got a lot of things going on, and really the baseball vibe this week. And we're going to get to that, but we got to get to more Lamar Jackson. Luke's got both on his mind. You can find him out at Baltimore. Luke, you can find me anywhere the internet is served. I'm even, now that I've been banned by both franchises, the Rotary Club has invited me out to be their guest speaker. I'm very appreciative that I'll be in Little Italy at Gia's on Tuesday giving a civic speech. And believe it or not, the theme of my speech, and I'm going to get down with this week with Marty Conway, is the significance of sports teams and why we give them $600 million to keep Stadia here. And oh, by the way, John Angelo still hasn't signed the lease. I'm Nestor. He's Luke. Stay with us. We're WNST, AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore. We never stop talking Baltimore positive.